Buenas tardes, hello, and welcome back to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. This month, I have the pleasure of speaking to Esther Gimeno Miró. Born in Pamplona, she's lived in various places since. She grew up splitting her time between Barcelona and Valencia, then Madrid, then studying on an Erasmus scholarship in London, then back to Madrid, then to Austin, Texas on a Fulbright scholarship, then back to Madrid, and then finally she landed in Barcelona. Her love of languages led her to study philology and to teach English and Spanish, everything from teaching children to prepping vice ministers for talks in Brussels at the European Commission and representatives of the Spanish National Agency for the Promotion of Education and beyond. Apart from her language background and education background, she also has a tech background. She has worked for multinationals including Google, Samsung, and Apple on the development of various projects such as conversational assistants, think Siri or Alexa. And it's working with Apple that brought her back to Barcelona. In order to deal with the stress of her day job, she started singing for fun, eventually forming 2 bands as well as a solo project. And as she delved further and further and further into the music scene and the music industry here in Barcelona, here in Catalonia, here in Spain, she realized that the support system for emerging artists was, in a word, lacking. So aside from being a computational linguist, a conversational AI specialist, a technology project manager, and educator, she is also an independent artist, and she is the co-founder and president of CABE, a non-profit organization that works to support emerging artists all across Spain. CABE is run by musicians for musicians. Its goal is to create a space where artists can support one another and share both their creative and management skills. So, busy woman. I can't wait to speak to her. Please welcome Esther Gimeno Miró to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. Thank you for talking to us and welcome to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. Before I start the interview, I want to say your earrings are super cool.
I'm a really good fan of design in general. I like designing clothing and jewelry. Every time I see something that I think it's really special and I can afford it, I go for it.
That's a good lead into some of the things I wanted to ask you, because design is a visual language. Mm-hmm. You seem like you're defined professionally, at least, by your love of languages, of English, Spanish, of the languages involved in technology, in programming and AI, as well as the language of music, forms of communication. So where did your love of languages and the process of trying to apply them, where did that come from?
I believe it's because in my home, communication was always difficult. I think I developed like an obsession with communication and to communicate feelings, to communicate how I was dealing with something. It was always difficult. I lived in a one-parent family and it was difficult for my father to communicate how he felt, and it made me find it difficult to communicate my own feelings and to understand his feelings or my brother's feelings. So it was a place in which it was difficult to get yourself understood or to understand others. So I think my obsession with communication started there.
Do you think that led you to study languages and tech and all these other things that you've been involved with over time?
Yeah, my brother, for example, he always had like a very peculiar way to communicate. And then my mother had a way to communicate that it's also weird. She had some moments in life in which she would decide negatives are forbidden and you can't use negatives in sentences, for example. I was just like, how can I communicate there's no milk if I don't use no?
How do you get around that?
You learn to say things like, we need milk.
Uh-huh. It sounds like it was a huge challenge, so I'm not going to say, well, that was great that you had that experience, because maybe not. But it's interesting the skills and the tools that must have given you, because later when you were working with students, teaching them languages, for example, all kinds of students from kids to diplomats to Spanish Air Force fighters working for their qualifications to be able to go on missions abroad for NATO. I mean, did you find that these communication skills helped you reach people that maybe weren't the easiest students to teach?
Yeah, definitely. I believe everything that I learned throughout my life and my process is useful today. Definitely my love for language and my love for communication and to find different ways to do so is totally related to that experience that I had when I was a child. But it's also reinforced by all that experience with teaching and learning how to teach as well. Because in the end, when you're faced with new challenges and with new kinds of students, you learn new ways in which you can deal with communication. For example, as you were saying, when I was preparing Air Force officers, that's a totally different way to communicate, and the challenges are totally different. They are more related to the noise that is caused by the radios, for example, or the codes that they use and how to hear them or interpret them. It's always been interesting and challenging and really thrilling to learn new ways to communicate. And music has been like my last discovery, but I'm really thrilled about everything that's happening about it. It's a new way to communicate other things that I couldn't put words to. It's like every time you discover something really cool about a different kind of language, you discover a part of your soul, of your own self, that has been there all this time and you didn't even notice.
So I think that's a great way to explain it. Of course, there's technique to play music, but that's not the same thing as being able to express yourself, right? Well, I want to talk to you about music, and I want to talk to you about technology. I want to talk to you about a million different things. Because you brought up music, let's start with music. You wear so many hats, and so that's just fantastic. The only problem for me is I can't make the interview like 5 hours long. But speaking of music, you discovered music only, like you said, a few years ago. You have 2 bands now, the Blues Walkers and the Teasers. You have a solo project. It's one thing to start a solo project. It's another thing to put together 2 bands and a solo project. How did you get those projects started? What's the difference between them? What do each of them give you?
To be honest, it's been organic. Basically, I started going to open mics and jams in Barcelona, and then I met musicians. I started thinking, well, why don't I start a project with them? So I put together a band that didn't work. We had like 2 gigs and that's it. But from that project, I jumped into another. This one worked. It was the Teasers. We played covers. We transformed it into a game, some kind of contest in which the audience needs to identify the song we're playing with the first 2-3 chords.
Okay.
So people normally have a lot of fun. And we organize the venue in a way in which you get to know other people. I think socializing is a very good part of the game. You get teams and you get a prize at the end. It was really cool. We played it for 9 months, maybe 10 months at Craft Bar. And then I met these Argentinian guys who just came to Barcelona. They played blues, and blues, for some reason, is part of my soul. I didn't know blues when I started singing. I just felt like it was sexy. So sometimes I would ask musicians to play the songs that I knew. Nobody knew my songs, so I started singing a cappella for a year, more or less, without musicians. And by the time some musicians were willing to play with me, and they decided blues was the thing. And I discovered that I could improvise lyrics and everything on top of whatever they were playing. So it's just like, it's working. And it came to me like very naturally. So I feel like blues is a way that I find easy for me to communicate. And I discovered that I was really angry.
Okay. Wait, so first of all, you didn't have any musical training. You just discovered that you could make up lyrics and improvise melodies on the spot, and it was a good way to channel your anger. All right.
Yeah. I was just saying what I felt. And then I was just like, okay, I went on stage thinking I was chill. And on stage, I discovered I was really, really angry. The second time I went on stage to improvise, the lyrics were something like, come closer so that I can stick my boot in your ass, something like that. And I was just like, oh, yeah, Esther, you're angry. Those lyrics were not chill.
Where did that come from then? Because music, as you mentioned, it kind of reaches down into your soul and brings up things you didn't know were there, right?
I was stressed out, and there was this company that I needed to deal with that was pushing me a lot. And I think that message was for them. But I played it sexy, and I needed to express it somehow. And I found a way. Blues was my way. Ever since I built this band called the Blues Walkers, I only have a couple songs that I wrote, but most of the songs are written by Jetty, our saxophonist and composer and director and keyboardist and everything. And then I have this solo artist project that I am starting to develop. I'm writing my own songs.
What's the difference for you between collaborating with the Blues Walkers, for example, to compose and composing on your own? Do you find it to be different?
Yeah, basically in Blues Walkers, I have only 2 songs that I wrote the lyrics for, but the music is always made by Jetty. So in my eyes, the Blues Walkers is a project by Jetty that I participate in with all my heart. But it's not my own thing. Does it make sense? My solo artist project is just me, my music, and my process of learning what music is for me.
For a lot of people who, as an adult, discover music, form 2 bands and a solo project, that would already be enough. But then through your love of music, you didn't stop there. You also formed CABE, which is the Colectivo de Artistas de Bandas Emergentes, which means the collective of emerging artists and bands, which started as a WhatsApp group, right? So whose idea was it to transform? I'm laughing only because, like I said, most people would be content with a full-time job and multiple artistic projects. But then, whose idea was it to transform this informal collective into this nonprofit with a mission to help support independent artists on a national level?
Honestly, I don't think it was anybody's idea in particular. It was like a combination of situations. I applied for this music contest on Instagram. I ended up in a WhatsApp group, and then we were there stranded for 3 months. Nobody was talking to us. So we started talking and saying, do you think it's a good idea to introduce each other? So people started sending information about their bands. That wasn't very successful because if you do that on a WhatsApp group, what ends up happening is it's spam. So then somebody suggested, why don't we make a playlist? That we did. It was really cool because we could listen to everybody's music, and we were like, wow, this sounds really amazing. So another person had the idea, why don't we have our own festival? Well, a festival, you need infrastructures that we don't have. We need media, fan base, some kind of organization that presents the project to City Hall. And we don't have that either. There are so many things that we're lacking right now. I see it like a super big project. So somebody said, hey, it looks like you know what we need. Why don't you start doing something about it? So I just created our internal infrastructure for communication through an app that is called Slack. And I created a community there. And then we started having proposals for different initiatives that may help us as artists and that may help the community per se, and trying to use our number as our strength to present our projects. So many of these ideas come from me myself, but at the same time, there are 3 of us who built CABE. There's Paco in Valencia, me in Barcelona, and Juan Carlos in Madrid. And the 3 of us are the co-founders of CABE. Creating a board, that's one of the first things that I did, together with the community, and then trying to fill up the different gaps that I see that we need help with. Booking strategy, marketing, social network strategy for the bands. Many bands don't have a clear idea of how social networks work, giving some workshops, explaining what we know, getting to know who in the community knows about something that can be shared.
There's about 70 artists, if I understand correctly, involved at the moment in CABE, right? So have you found that it's a collaborative spirit as opposed to a competitive spirit?
Yeah, that's the whole point. I honestly believe art per se is perceived as not a business. But in the end, artists need to live. It's what it is. So even if you don't want to treat it as a business because you want to love it and care about it and be romantic about it, the truth is you want to live doing it. And you need to be able to do that by understanding it is a business or a kind of business. Not every artist has that mindset. So we need to work with that. And we need to work with education on how to get there without losing the beauty of art. Because it's true that we don't want to make sharks out of this. We can collaborate and be a community and love each other and help each other. The thing with artists is that on the one hand, there are many of us who do not see what we're doing as exactly a career, and there are many others who are lone wolves. And that's another thing that we're trying to address, because to me, a band is a startup. It's the same concept. If you don't see it like that, it's difficult for you to see that, for example, startups have hubs. You collaborate with other startups and you grow. But in the case of musicians, it's like we are all lone wolves. We compete for the same or for similar audience. We bombard the audience with the same material once and twice and thrice. And it's like all the time the same. And the idea would be, let's do it together and create a strategy together that we are happy with. And to me, that makes way more sense. I'm not saying anything new. What I mean is this happens in the startup world. Mm-hmm. And what I'm only doing is to say, okay, why don't we just copy the model and create a hub for musicians? And we don't compete for the same. We collaborate and help each other. And if you know about marketing or digital marketing, why don't you share it with your pals?
Do you find people, artists that you have invited to be a part of the CABE organization or who were already in the WhatsApp group, do you find that people responded well to this idea, not only of sharing information, but also this concept of look at your project as essentially a startup? Do you find people were resistant to this, or were they like, oh, that makes perfect sense?
I would say there are profiles. Different bands have different understanding of their project. Some genres are more resistant to this idea of treating their art as a kind of business. In some ages, like age range of musicians, are also really reluctant to try to deal with what they're doing as a business.
Do you find that the older artists or the younger artists are more likely to be open to the idea of taking into account the financial aspect of things?
I would say older artists are more reluctant. I think youngsters understand everything is business. I would say after millennials, everything is okay to be a startup.
Interesting.
Whereas when you talk to people who are a little bit older, it is harder because too many artists making music is a way to relax, to be in communion with themselves. But the truth is, if you want to take the project to something a little bit more professional, you need to make some moves there that are business related. I would say that Spanish people are not the best at doing that. The startup universe in Spain is not very well developed for the moment. That has to do with the culture, the business culture, but it's also related to it's not easy in Spain to be a freelancer, and it's not easy to create your own project. You have difficulties all over the place. I'm not saying it's not difficult elsewhere, but I would say Spain is especially difficult. I've met people who are dealing with their startups in the north of Europe, and they don't have the same issues that we have here to get funding, to get help from the government, and to get partnerships. Startup hubs are more likely to happen in any other place rather than in Spain.
I wish I could say, oh, that's so strange. I don't agree at all. But unfortunately, that is not what I would say. As I've noticed, there's a lot of barriers to entry, so to speak, whether it's a small business or a freelancer or an artist. For people who don't know, who don't work in the worlds of art or the worlds of a startup, what are the things that you think need to or should change to make it easier for someone, whether they have a small business or whether they're an artist who is just getting started, to make it easier for them to not get rich and famous automatically, but just to simply have infrastructure that's more conducive to work? What would you change first?
I believe the culture needs to change. I would say that in Spain, there's difficulty adapting and there's difficulty changing perspectives in general in every business. I've worked for different multinationals. In all of them, I've seen like a totally different infrastructure, internal infrastructure. All of them are dynamic in a way. And what I've seen is that Spanish companies, even the big ones, are not that dynamic. I would say that's part of the culture that needs to change. It's not dynamic enough. That's why we have more issues adapting to new technologies in Spain. And that's why it's difficult to build anything alone here. People still believe in you need to make it big and a lot of funding. And it's like, that's not how a good business works. You try to create opportunities with little money, and then you iterate several times, learn about the process, and then you grow. That's the way I think it works, and that's not part of the Spanish culture regarding business. Of course, I am biased because I come from the software universe, and that's how you work in software. You create a product, a small product with very little budget, then you learn about what clients or the customers need, and then you improve it, and that's how you make it work, and you make it bigger like that. I believe that's a good way to work, and it's not the general one that I find in Spain.
Is this a good parallel between the kind of advice you could give to a beginning baby band or a new artist? The only difference is if you're talking about a product versus an artistic offering. When you say you see what customers need, nobody is necessarily needing new music. There's so much music out there, but there is stuff that people want and that they respond to. So by starting small and seeing what people respond to, you can grow your project. But that doesn't seem to be really a lot of artists' mindsets. It's like, no, I just want to go viral and that's it. So you having come from the world of technology, as you mentioned, and you worked on concepts that would eventually become what people know today as the large language models, basically the premise for ChatGPT and all this stuff. So having come from that world and now being involved in music as well, how do you see not only the actual technology itself, but also the way that the technology has impacted the culture? How do you see how that's changed the world of music too?
I would say technology is changing the whole paradigm in general. Before ChatGPT, for example, we were obsessed about the procedures and putting a lot of energy and budget into tasks that can be easily automatized by something like ChatGPT. And you can stop worrying about that in a way and learn how to use these new technologies to help you out with the parts of the artistic process that you don't want to do. Most artists don't enjoy the marketing part, dealing with booking, having to talk to so many people. The truth is, as a startup, because I believe a band is a startup, you need to deal with that. If you don't want to do it yourself, hire somebody. If you don't have the money to hire somebody, then learn. It's the way it works. I would say technology can help there with all those tasks that we all hate.
That brings to my mind an interesting question. That's the part that as an artist you don't want to do. You don't want to do booking, you don't want to do social media, you don't want to do marketing, or maybe some people like some of those things but not others. The logistics. We like less of that so you have more time to do the art. But these days, artificial intelligence is being used increasingly as a method to create art, almost like a substitution for the human part of the composition, for example. So as someone who does make music herself, I would like technology to help me with all the boring stuff so I can have more time to make actual art. But other people seem to see it as a shortcut. Tell me what the algorithm says a hit song would be so I can get famous and go. So how do you feel about the potential for AI to become a part of the creation process itself?
To be honest, I am thrilled about it because I believe it's a tool. I don't think of AI or of any kind of new technology as a way to substitute humans. I know many people see it that way, and I understand why. But the truth is, every time I see or talk about technology, I see it as a tool. Humans use tools. When VHS came out, everybody said the cinemas were going to die. And the cinemas didn't die until Netflix. So what I mean is, technology doesn't need to mean death or any kind of model. It's just a new tool and you just decide what to do with it. Of course, every tool has its pros and cons and you can use it for really evil things. I am sure that AI can be used for terrible, horrible things. I just hope we don't use it for that. But it's a tool. Evil is in the hand that moves it. When we talk about creation of music, I find it funny because in the 60s, end of 50s and beginning of 60s, it was already AI. There were already some projects and they were trying to emulate jazz, to create pieces of jazz with AI. People thought that they were gonna substitute humans. Many people have never heard of these programs. There were several projects and they were built at universities. So every university had their own project. MIT, I'm sure, was involved in one of them. It was the beginning of trying to use computation for guessing what next note could work. The thing is that with LLMs and with big data, we can use all the data, like large amounts of data, to feed the system so that it can learn patterns from all the material that you've fed it. This has changed and it's easier for the system to learn because it doesn't work with rules. In the past, it was with rules. It would be like, after this note, you can find these other three options. And the system would go like, let's try this one. And if I try this one, then let's try that one. And with that, they were creating jazz. As I was saying, the tests that were made with them would pass the Turing test. The Turing test is a way to say that a human would not notice it was not a machine. They could think it was made by a person, but it didn't substitute anyone. The new systems, I don't think they necessarily need to substitute anyone either. When I mentioned evil, for example, I was thinking, for example, using somebody's music as your own on purpose, because I can tell the system, use this piece of this song and then add this and that, or use the bass of blah, blah, blah. But the truth is we have copied and pasted all our lives in the arts world to try to emulate or give a twist to something that we already know. What I mean is, when I say evil, I'm not saying getting inspiration from, I'm saying just copy pasting and taking credit for something that is not yours.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you as far as that differentiation goes, because if I listen to a song of yours and I really like it and I say, okay, I want to write something like that, or people who listen to Jimi Hendrix or the Beatles or Ariana Grande, who knows, they have an artist they love, and so they've been inspired and educated in a way by this person's form or this band's form of creating. It's different than feeding copyrighted material into a machine and saying, write a book, write a song based on this. So do you see there to be a difference there in terms of ethics or in terms of a need of legal regulation when it comes to like one versus the other?
I believe we need one. My biggest concern with AI and open source is that we don't have access to the feeds of OpenAI, for example. Like, authors don't know if their work has been used to feed the system. And I believe authors should be paid for being part of the system. I don't don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a shame that it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen because I think it's very difficult to make OpenAI and other companies that are working with big data to tell exactly where they got all the information. I don't think they even know where all that information came from. It's difficult to track.
In terms of technology and the arts, that's been something that's been a problem for a very long time, whether you're talking about Spotify or whatever. Maybe it's a lack of legislative will, but the laws are not keeping up with the tech, and laws have to be in some cases a substitute for ethics because not all people will use the new tech and the powerful tech. Well, some people will, some people won't. In the case of a young artist, for example, somebody who's part of CABE who's like, look, I want to try to make my living with my music and I'm worried about all this stuff, this with AI and I don't know. What would you tell someone, him or her, like, okay, where do I start? What should I do? What are the most important things to keep in mind? How do I make my life easier? I'm sure you get those kind of questions all the time.
I get this kind of question. What I do is to tell them to give me some time to organize a workshop. Try to find an expert in the legal field, because I am not, and create this workshop with that person so that I can be the tech expert and the other person the legal expert. And then we can do something together to explain how that may work and give ideas. I think education is not about giving specific answers, but about opening a range of possible outcomes and possible solutions. And then the person is the one who needs to decide what's the best for them.
And if you don't mind me asking, you're doing so much. You have these musical projects and you have CABE and you have all this other work you've done. And you've also been dealing with, in the past 5 years, serious health issues. You had a cancer diagnosis, you've had immunotherapy, surgeries. I mentioned that because we're talking about all this fascinating stuff that has to do with the future. We're talking about art, we're talking about tech. It's all kind of cerebral, right? But then things become very small just when you suddenly have to focus on your body and staying alive and being healthy. So how have you had the energy and the spirit to continue to work on these fairly big ideas and to work on helping all these people, even though you've also had to deal with this very personal battle?
Well, honestly, being sick has given me extra time to dedicate to CABE. The medication that I'm taking has caused several side effects that prevent me from moving properly most of the time. So what I have done with that time that I've been sick at home is just giving me more time to think about new ways in which I can improve CABE. So to me, CABE has also been a way to explore different sides of me that I didn't know existed, and trying to use my situation in a way in which I can still feel like I'm useful. Because most of the times when people think about sickness, it's like, this is the end. I have to stop doing stuff and I sit and worry at home. To me, that's really depressing. So it's given me strength and time to work on a project that I really love, helping out different musicians, different bands, meeting all those wonderful people that are trying to make things work and many times don't know how to, and I don't have all the answers. I'm just getting to know different ways in which I can help. So to me, combining my professional career, my inability to have a job right now, with having my own project and being able to develop it, even though it's been tough because not having a job and not having income in my situation has been really tough. But at least I'm not only looking through the window and hoping I can do something with my life. I found a way to express what I needed to express through music, and I found a way to use my experience through CABE to put together several worlds. I feel like life is several lives, and CABE is a way to put them together. I feel not lucky because sickness is not lucky, but I feel like I would have never been able to do this without that free time or that break in my career in which I could stop and think of what I really wanted. And believe me, cancer makes you feel of what you really want to do with your life. That's how I can make it work, putting together all my lives and building something out of it.
I respect that very much.
I think it's part of the trip, of this journey that life is. You get to certain points in certain moments, and you don't need to get there earlier or later. You just need to get there.
I agree with that.
See you and enjoy. Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome. Thanks to you. Thank you so much, Esther, for taking the time to talk to us here on the Metropolitan Culture Corner. If those of you watching at home would like to know more about CABE or to hear the music of the artists involved, including Esther herself, you can look up CABE's Instagram page, which is at cabe.ig. They're always announcing concerts by their artists, or you can check out their official playlists on Spotify. Next month, we'll be taking a short break from the Metropolitan Culture Corner, but we'll be back after that with more behind-the-scenes conversations with the fascinating individuals who make up the local arts and culture scene. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to the Metropolitan Culture Corner, and thank you for supporting local art and culture.